Several years ago at Southeast Christian Church on a Wednesday evening, they usually average around 600 on a Wednesday evening, they offered a time for people to come forward and have the elders pray for them and lay their hands on them for healing. Their response started out kind of small. Then it started growing a little bit more. Then a multitude of people came forward. Many of the elders didn't expect that many people to respond, but neither did they anticipate the type of prayers that was needed. 2 out of 3 asked prayer for depression. One of the elders said, "I thought it would be more for physical needs, but so many said, I'm depressed. I feel unworthy. I see no future." He said, "I was amazed how many people felt unworthy." Today we're continuing our sermon series entitled Me Too, where we're looking at the different aspects or different struggles that we all face at times in our life. Today we're going to look at depression, or the feeling of loneliness as well. This was a difficult sermon for me, but I was going through some articles, I think it was yesterday or Friday, and I came across one article that said the church needs to talk more about mental health issues. And I'm like, well, that hits perfect of what we're talking about this Sunday. But here's some of the statistics that was in that article. It says it is reported that 1 in 10 Americans are affected by depression. Over 80% of people who are clinically depressed are not receiving treatment. The number of people diagnosed with depression increases by 30% every year. And an estimated 121 million people around the world suffer with depression. Now, when we talk about depression, one thing that I want us to know is there's 2 types of depression. The first type is endogenous depression. It is a biological in nature, and it requires medicine, oftentimes antidepressants, for the treatments. In other words, this type of depression happens when the chemistry in your brain starts to get out of whack. Think about it like a swimming pool. If it has the right balance, then the pool is clear and it's clean. But if it doesn't have the right balance, then it is cloudy. It's filled with algae. And medicine can help to replenish the serotonin. And exercise is good as well because it will release those feel-good endorphins. But the difficulty about it is that most people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit that they go through depression. The reason that they don't want to admit that they go through depression is because most people will blame depression, especially the use of antidepressants, on a lack of faith. So by blaming it on a lack of faith or an immoral lifestyle, people don't want to admit it, and they won't seek help. But that's about the same if somebody has diabetes. You say, don't take your diabetic medicine. Just have faith that God will take care of it. My belief is that God works in science as well. And God helped us to discover the things that will help us emotionally and physically. Rebecca Miles is a 20-year-old Oregon woman who is a junior at George Fox University. And she has a tattoo, and most of you know that tattoos are conversation starters. But she has a tattoo that symbolizes her struggle with depression. If you look at the tattoo, it's on her left thigh. If you look at the tattoo straight on, it reads, "I'm fine." But if you read the tattoo from her perspective, when she looks down on it, it says, "Save me." Rebecca says, "To me, it means that others see this person that seems okay, but in reality is not okay at all. It reminds me that people who may appear happy may be at battle within themselves." She also tells the news that she was inspired to get this tattoo after one of her psychology professors, Dr. Christina Kays, spoke about her struggles. with depression. Dr. K said, I decided a few years back that it was something that would be important for many students to know. That it wasn't just other people, but it was people that they know, and that there is a way out. When I started this sermon series quite a few weeks back, one of the things that I said is that I wanted to be more open, that I want to be more honest, that I wanted to be more vulnerable. I even made a joke out of it, saying that you would leave here and say, oh, you'd be welcome at our church because a preacher had a nervous breakdown last week. But oftentimes people will come up to me and they say, you know, that sermon that you wrote was for me. And I'm glad to hear it. But most of the sermons that I write is for me. And this one especially. Because this is one of my most difficult struggles. About a year or so back, I went to the doctor because I was having some chest pains, so I had a stress test and an echocardiogram and things like that, and all the tests came back fine. So I went to the doctor and we talked, and I was telling her everything that I was going through, the chest pains, and for the past year or two before that, I was just feeling like I was in a daze. I couldn't get enough sleep. I was just exhausted and tired. And she looked at me, and she knew I was a preacher, and she looked at me and she said, would you mind if I put you on some antidepressants? And I said, well, let's try. The first one that we tried didn't really work out very well. The second one we tried, it was the difference from night and day. And for the last year or so, I've still been on those antidepressants. And for me, that was a struggle. It was a struggle of whether that was a lack of faith, that I'm not trusting in God enough to help me through this, or what. And then I start reading different articles about other people who struggle with it. People like Archibald Hart. He's the former dean of the School of Psychology at Fuller University, or Fuller Seminary. And he would often say that surviving ministry is a matter of surviving depression. And if you look at many ministers and many preachers out there, most of them struggle with depression. There's a second type of depression. The second type of depression is exogenous depression. This type of depression usually occurs from a loss. It could be a loss of anything. Anywhere from a loss of a loved one to crushed expectations. This is a type of depression that everyone will face at some time in their life, because it happens with circumstances that you face. That type of depression, it could last for a brief period, or it could last for a long time. Both types of depression, though, has pretty much the same symptoms, including confused thinking, a loss in interest in job and hobbies, fear of losing one's mind, feeling of helplessness, an appetite shift in either direction, sleep pattern changes, guilt, and stomach discomfort. And it's this type of depression, the depression that is looking at the circumstances that you face in life, is the type of depression that we're going to look at today. You know, depression isn't something that's new. Many of the great men throughout the Bible, they struggled with depression. Moses was the depressed leader of Israel, because every time that he turned around, all he heard was griping about something. We need water. We're starving. We need food, but we don't like the manna that you gave us. Imagine if you were surrounded by that much complaining, you'd probably be depressed too. But for Moses, at one point in his life, he was so depressed that it tells us in Numbers chapter 11 that he asked God to take his life. Job was also depressed. He lost everything that he had, and then he cursed the day that he was born. He says, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil." David was depressed when he said in Psalm 6, 2 through 3 and verse 6, it says, "Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am faint. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are in agony. My soul is in anguish. How long, O Lord, how long? I am worn out from groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping and drench my couch with tears." The Apostle Paul was also depressed because in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, we're told that he had a thorn in the flesh, possibly there to keep him humble. But Paul didn't like that thorn. You know, nobody likes thorns sticking out of their side or in their spirit. Paul even said that that thorn was a messenger from Satan to torment him. So depression isn't so much as a lack of faith. Since some of the great men in scriptures, the ones that had the greatest faith, also struggled with it as well. And when I think about struggling with depression, the one that I think about the most is Elijah. It's interesting. I think God gives us a pretty good case study of what depression looks like with Elijah. All the classic symptoms were there. He had fear. Scripture says Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. He had suicidal tendency. Elijah prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." He had an excessive tiredness. It says then he laid down under the tree and fell asleep. Some think that he slept for maybe a few days, maybe even more. And he had feeling of rejection and feeling of loneliness. He said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left. Now they're trying to kill me too." You know, in this depression that he was going through, it didn't last for a short amount of time. It lasted for nearly 2 months, maybe even longer. But to understand his story, we need to kind of set the stage for you, to see what was going on in his life at this time. Well, there was a severe famine in the land. And Elijah was called to confront King Ahab. Now, King Ahab was the one that was married to Jezebel, the one that was killing the prophets. But God called him to confront him. And when Ahab goes to confront, or when Elijah goes to confront Ahab, Ahab sees him and he says, "There's the troublemaker." And Elijah looks at him and he says, "No, it's not. You are the troublemaker of Israel." He's saying that to the king. And then he offers a challenge. He says, "Get your 450 prophets of Baal, and we will choose today who is God. Is it God or is it Baal?" So what they did is they built 2 altars. They cut up 2 bulls into pieces. They put them on the altars, and that they would begin to pray that their God would send fire from heaven and take away and burn up the sacrifice. So Elijah said, "You all can go first." So you have the 450 prophets of Baal crying out to their God to send fire from heaven. Nothing happened. So they got a little bit more enthusiastic. They began to start cutting themselves and screaming out to Baal to send down fire. And what did Elijah do? Elijah began to make fun of them. He said, maybe your God's on a journey. Or maybe he's relieving himself. In other words, maybe he's in the bathroom. Or maybe he's asleep. You need to holler a little bit louder so that you can wake him up. He's making fun of them. You got 1 prophet against 450. And still nothing happened. And now it's Elijah's turn. But calling fire from heaven to burn up the sacrifice apparently wasn't hard enough. So he had them to build a trench or a ditch around the sacrifice and told them to go get a pitcher and pour water all over the sacrifice. As you know, water and fire doesn't really go good together. And he said, "Well, that's not good enough. Do it again." Still not enough water. Do it again. The scriptures tells us that the sacrifice is just completely covered in water, and then he calls to God. He begins to pray. And God sends down fire from heaven and not only burns up the sacrifice, but the scripture says that it licks up all of the water that was around it. And then Elijah gathered together the 450 prophets and he had them killed. So you can imagine that Elijah by this point is kind of on that spiritual high. He has just shown up 450 prophets. He has just shown Israel who is the true God. And now he begins to pray, and God sends water. He sends rain, because remember there was a famine, because there was no rain in the land. Now God is sending rain by Elijah's request. But Ahab goes back to his wife, and he tells Jezebel everything that has happened. And Jezebel begins to threaten Elijah. She said, "Let happen to me, or even worse, if I don't kill you." Elijah becomes fearful, becomes afraid, becomes depressed. And he runs off in the wilderness by himself. But my question is this: why would a man who has just experienced some of the most powerful displays of God's power suddenly be crippled by fear and run away? Why would he run away to a desolate place and seek death? Imagine, these events are not something that happened, one happened here and 2 or 3 years later this happened. There are probably a few days between. So why? Why go from that now down to hopelessness, despair, and wanting to die? Well, it could be many reasons. But it tells us that even God's most dynamic servants can suffer from depression. So it's not necessarily a lack of faith or even a mark of an immoral lifestyle. It's just something that we're all going to face at some time in our life. But I love God's response. How God dealt with Elijah. Because God didn't say, "Get a hold of yourself, Elijah," or "This is a sinful attitude that you have," or "Where's your faith?" It's not what God did. So what did he do? Well, first of all, he took care of Elijah. When Elijah fell asleep underneath the broom tree, verse 5 through 6 tells us, "And he laid down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, 'Arise and eat.' And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank, and he lay back down again. And it happens again. But the angel adds this time, 'Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you.'" So what does God do? Instead of chastising him, instead of telling him he has no faith, "Don't you remember what I just did for you? Why are you afraid of Jezebel?" God bakes him a cake. We're talking probably bread here, but God bakes him a cake. He gives him water. He lets him sleep again. He bakes him another cake. Gives him more water. He sends him on this journey. God sends him on this spiritual renewal journey. Because God sent Elijah to Mount Horeb. It's also known as the Mount of God. It's where Moses received the 10 Commandments. He was there for 40 days and 40 nights, and more than likely he was renewing his spirit that he needed so much since he was so depleted. So God sent him to a place that he would felt the closest to God, so that he could draw closer to him and rely on his strength. And then God gets to the core of the issue. He asks, "What are you doing here?" Now, God isn't saying, "What are you doing here on this mountain?" Because Elijah's response would be, "You told me to come here." But what he's asking when he says, "What are you doing here?" He's saying, "Why are you in this state in your life? Why are you going through this depression? What is going on? What is at the core?" And Elijah's response will show his feelings of loneliness and his feelings of frustration. That he has been trying to do everything that he can for God, but every time he does something good, he's just met with opposition. He's getting frustrated. And in verse 14 it says, he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altar, and killed the prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left. And they seek my life to take it away. You see his fear? He's afraid that he's the only one left. He's afraid that they're going to try to kill him, that they will succeed. And he's wondering why he's been so jealous or so zealous for God, and still all of this is happening to him. Doesn't understand. But fear and loneliness is at the core of his depression. And God does one more thing. God gives Elijah a mission. He tells him to go and anoint Hazael to be king of Syria, to anoint Jehu to be king of Israel, and then to anoint Elisha to be the prophet in his place. You know, sometimes that's what we need. We need a mission. We need something to do, to get our focus off ourselves and on something else. There was one man that was asked, how do you deal with depression? And he says, every time that I start feeling depressed, I'll get up, go across the street, and do something for someone else. When I look at what God did for Elijah, I realize that God will do the same thing for us. Maybe not in the same way. We all have different needs, but he will be there. He took care of Elijah, he will take care of us. It might not be as prominent as him baking us a cake and giving us water, but he's still there to take care of us in our lowest of low. As God sent Elijah on that spiritual journey, when we're in those times of depression, there's nowhere better we can be than relying on him. Reading his word, praying. It's not always easy when you're in those positions. That's what's needed. Then you need to get to the core of the issue. Why am I going through this? Is it fear? Is it a loss? Is it crushed expectations? What's causing this? And then God has given every single one of us a mission. He has given every single one of us different gifts that we can use to further his kingdom. And we don't have to do that within a church setting. You know, I love the Great Commission because what he's saying when he tells them to go and make disciples of all nations, the word that he actually uses there in the Greek is, as you go, make disciples. So wherever you're at in your life, whether it's at work or somewhere else, make disciples. It doesn't have to be in the church building. We are the church that goes out. We have a mission to do. I don't know where you're at. I don't know if you're going through depression or you have just got out of depression and you're looking back and you're seeing, yeah, he has helped me through that. But one thing that I know is you can't make it through it without him. That's why that spiritual journey is so needed. Because you have to be close to him. But if you're anything like me, when I get in those states, I step back. I usually go farther away from him instead of closer. But the times that I have found myself running to him, the times that I've found peace, I found comfort. It helped me through those difficult times in my life. And I know it will continue to. So if that's what you want to do, you want to come to him, And do that today. Whatever your decision is, come now as we stand and sing.